What's more important, to try and prevent something bad from happening, or to fight for the right to use a word that can be offensive? Hello and welcome back everyone, and I do hope you're having a great time. Today I'm going to be discussing the woke, the anti-woke, what's between them, the arguments on each side, and where we're getting things wrong. I'll start with the description. The term woke is used nowadays to describe being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. Some people take it back to the 20th century. However, it only gained momentum in the last 5 to 6 years following the Black Lives Matter movement in the US that went out against the ongoing discrimination and violence against the black community. Today it refers to more than the definition itself, and it commonly gets mixed with using specific pronouns or being hypersensitive about words used from other people. The ones who are for it claim it's very much a necessity to protect the minorities and those vulnerable communities from discrimination and prejudice. The ones who are against it, on the other hand, claim that it's a fight against their rights to freedom of expression, and it's an evil plan against the community values and the patriarchal structure of society. So who's right and who's wrong? Historically, there have always been movements for deprived communities and those in the community who are weaker. For example, the movement for the rights of women, what is now referred to as feminism, workers' rights, and other ethnic and religious minorities' rights groups across the world. All of these movements were targeted under one pretext or another. Here are a few examples. Those who were working to abolish slavery in the United States were constantly battled, and those who battled them claimed that they're working against their rights because they relied heavily on slave labor in their communities and they were helping them economically. Those who advocated for 8-hour workdays, for example, and workers' rights during the Industrial Revolution were fought against from the major and most of the industrial complex back then, because to them it obviously stunted growth because they needed people to work more, to get more money, get more productivity. Similar with women's rights movements. Just over 70 years ago, women weren't allowed to vote in many countries because they were seen as having less of a brain than a man. So, wherever you had a movement for some sort of justice or equality between people or the majority of the population and the deprived communities, you always had people fighting them under one pretext or another. In all the examples that I've just given you, it was totally acceptable to use derogatory, discriminatory, and racist terms against these communities that we found today to be completely out of order and unacceptable. The anti-woke camp are claiming that it's limiting the freedom of expression. So why are they saying that? Woke started to become more than what it was intended to be, and for some, it started to be an enforcement tool to use specific words and not to use specific words. Or, in other words, an enforcement tool. Especially when it comes to pronouns or preferred pronouns for people who undergo a sexual transition, and what you should and shouldn't call them. This example is being taken by the anti-woke camp to show that there's an actual war on freedom of speech, and furthermore, that there's an actual war on the values of society that start with the family, and to some, the hierarchical, patriarchal structure of society as well. So on one hand, you have the people fighting for freedom of speech, and on the other hand you have people fighting or claiming to fight against discrimination and prejudice. So whose side should you be on? Many people underestimate how valuable the social justice movements in the world are, especially if you don't come from a background that has traditionally suffered from any type of stereotypes, discrimination, or prejudice. And don't take this from me as a stamp of approval for everything, for example, the woke movement does. However, what I'm saying is it's easy to dismiss any movement that works for social justice if you haven't personally been a victim of what the battle is against. At the end of the day, many of us are privileged in many ways because of a battle that someone has fought somewhere along the lines. If you only take the status of women nowadays in society, that will give you a clearer picture. the status of women did not change just because men somehow started seeing them differently. It changed because there has been an ongoing effort by social justice movements led by lots of women to try and remove the stereotypes linked to women in general. You had lots of women's rights advocacy, lots of battles, and lots of sacrifices. Yes, in some cases, obviously, they can lead to extremist ideologies like extreme feminism, for example. But that doesn't mean the general theme or the general results of that battle did not bring anything good with them. And if you take a couple of negative sides to a specific battle, that doesn't mean you should completely reverse the course of history just because of these points that you do not like. Going back to woke, the core foundation that it's based upon, being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination, is a noble cause on its own. However, it is at the end of the day a developmental change in society. And as with all developmental changes in society, you have flaws and mistakes that come with it. And that's where we should be vocal. For some reason, despite the fact that this movement has had deeper roots, the main focus started to be around the sexual side of things. Now, I don't know if it's humankind's nature to focus on these things or because there's sensitivity around the pronunciations and there's the children's education involved. I'm not entirely sure, and it could be a combination of all of that plus some other reasons. However, you shouldn't forget the root causes behind the movement itself, fighting racial discrimination and prejudice. The problem with the anti-woke camp nowadays is their label, anti-woke. So, if you know the definition of woke and you take it as it defines itself, an alertness to racial discrimination and prejudice, then are you by default saying that you're pro-racism and anti-alertness to being racist and prejudice against other people? Or are you just focusing on the sexual side of things when it comes to the whole movement? The problem with the anti-woke camp is that they're disregarding the benefits that are coming from the woke camp and the benefits that it gives to deprived communities or communities that are prone to have prejudice and discrimination against them, as if it's somehow an ideological battle that does not resonate on the ground. Well, let me tell you something. It does resonate on the ground. However, you can't just keep taking the pronoun side of things and the people who are so pro that they only focus on it and disregard everything else that comes with it. Although you may well be on the right side of the argument when it comes to these things. People and even intellectuals discussing this are missing the core aspect. There is an underlying struggle for justice. Yes, its champions may be flawed, and yes, their view on justice may be distorted as well. So instead of battling the whole movement or saying, look, listen, I know you got this side of things right, but this is wrong and this is how we can interpret justice, for example, you go and battle the whole movement and side by default with the racists and the supremacists, or worse, creating a new generation of them. And look, I don't like anyone telling me what to do or how to raise my children or telling me how my children should be indoctrinated. However, I do think many people are missing the point, and it's very easy to miss the point when you haven't been the victim of what the battle is against. I was talking to one of my Asian friends the other day about politics and racism, and I was giving him my ideas on Islam and Islamophobia in the media, and he was like, yeah, but you're white. I was like, what do you mean I'm white? He was like, you're white. He was brown Asian with a darker skin tone, and he was telling me, you don't understand though. When you have a different skin tone, it's a completely separate story. And then I paused for a second and I was like, am I focusing on this because I describe myself as that? And can I also easily miss other things that other people go through? It just highlighted to me how easy it is for me not to understand these things, and that you actually need to make an effort to understand what people go through on a day-to-day basis with a different skin color, with a different clothing, and all of these things. Another problem is that the debate is taking a left versus right shape, when really and truly both people on the left can be victims of authoritarian approach and an attempt to limit their freedom of expression, and people on the right can be victims of prejudice and discrimination. And look, you can still fight against discrimination and prejudice and at the same time respect other people's right to object it. However, if you believe in something and you want to be vocal about it, and as a result of you being vocal about what you believe in, someone gets hurt or even killed, then you must understand that you should face repercussions and preventative measures where your actions have caused harm to other people. I'll give you an example in the UK 3 years ago when Boris Johnson made derogatory racist comments about the women who wear burqa. Immediately after that was published, Islamophobic comments and hate crimes rose by 400%. When Donald Trump was elected and gave a backing to the far right in America, hate crimes against blacks, Jews, and other minorities in America increased massively. So what people, specifically people in power or people of influence who have a far reach, what they say translate on the ground and can get people killed. So being careful with the words you use is getting more and more important, because we live in a world that is getting more and more diverse and connected. That's not to say that we can't have a debate, but generally speaking, we all know what can be offensive to one person and not offensive to another. And people forget that society and societal norms tend to self-regulate with time. What we need to make sure of is that they don't self-regulate bad habits. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to be living in a society that normalizes bigotry, discrimination, and racism. I find a profound example in policing in the UK, despite the fact that I have a lot of criticism as to how it works, how it operates, and its priorities. But the police in the UK, most of them don't carry weapons. And that sends a strong message to the society that they deal with. I'm here to resolve a problem, not to hurt you. On the other hand, you have countries like Israel and America, where almost every security force is heavily armed, and you don't reduce the rates of incarceration, you don't reduce the violence in society, and you don't have less crime. As a matter of fact, society starts to suck in all of that violence and negativity from the states, and the people themselves become more violent and more prone to crime because the state set an example for them. Another problem I find is that both sides are philosophizing the debate a little bit too much. You have the anti-camp talking about, oh, well, what does racism mean? Well, is that word racist? Is this racist? And you have the other side telling you, oh no, if something changes or this person does that, then they automatically become a woman or a they or a whatever they want to call it. And there's just too much philosophy involved, when at the end of the day, it's clear what can offend people and what cannot offend people, unless you're living on another planet. And there's no problem with debating these things and being all philosophical. However, that doesn't give you the right to justify hate or violence or discrimination against the other party. At the end of the day, it boils down to priorities. What is more important? Trying to prevent something bad from happening, or fighting for your right to use an offensive word or one that can be deemed as such? Now, does this mean we need to go and change the whole dictionary to suit other people? Of course not. But at the same time, does it also mean that we need to ban and cancel anyone if they make a slight mistake, even though they apologize for it and retract from it? Of course not. At the end of the day, you don't want to raise the dialect bar so high up that only a fraction of society is able to reach it, and the rest of the population can't have a conversation, don't express themselves in fear of repercussions or that they might offend someone somehow, and letting everything fester in. And we all know what happens when you let things fester in. People should be able to freely express themselves and at the same time be mindful of the words that they use and who they might offend. And I know it's not an easy job to do, but it sure is possible. We just need to keep setting things straight when they go too far on this side or the other side.